Good morning, everyone. And I know there's no one there yet. So I'm just going to give it a few minutes for people to actually join the live stream. And I will edit this out for anyone who is watching this as a recording. But then I guess I'll go ahead and give a little introduction. I am the creative Contessa, and today I'm going to be walking you through some of my experiments with dip starching, which is the way in which garments in the Middle Ages were starched. And so I've been playing with that because I've learned a lot of things recently about starching and its benefits not only to wearing, but to actually creating garments. So yeah, this has been an interesting run for me because I am living in a very small apartment right now and I don't really have access to a yard. I don't have access to most of my equipment that's in storage somewhere in Albuquerque. So there's been some creative approaches to dip starching that my laundress forebearers might find amusing. So while we wait for people to join, and I will go ahead and sure I can see the live chat. While we wait for people to join, I'm going to go ahead and put on my signature coif. For those of you who are watching this as a recording, you get to observe the process. So, good morning. Good morning, everyone. So, we're about to do some experiments with starching today. I hope for those who can join that it will be interesting. I have been playing with starching. I started with spray starching and now I've migrated to dip starching because spray starching was super frustrating. And I'm using my own starch solution, not any of the laundry, the ones that you can get in the stores. I haven't looked at those, but I imagine that they're probably filled with all sorts of chemicals that weren't available in the Middle Ages and that I don't want in my clothes, especially things that I'm going to wear in my life. And this was using my spray starch solution. And you can actually see, look at this lovely frame it gives now that it's been starched. And it's not so stiff, right? You can still see it has flex, but I can feel it actually feels like silky smooth now that it's been starched. I want to pet myself, which okay, everyone, don't run away with that. Anyway, so this you can see this exact look in a lot of the images of women in the second half of the 15th century wearing this style of winged coif when they don't have it folded back, which is a lot of queens are depicted with the coif worn like this. So yeah, so we're going to be starching the veil actually. I've already starched it. So I'm going to take you into the starching room, which also doubles as a guest bathroom and also doubles as the kitty's bathroom. So I'm just going to ask for everyone's understanding on that. I'm living in slightly challenging circumstances, nothing too bad. It just makes this living history stuff a little more interesting. So let us head into the bathroom. And yes, I am in Korea. I'm not Korean. I am a mutt a mutt of mixed heritage and a citizen of the world. So let's go into the bathroom now, and I'm going to talk you through some of my lessons already learned from starching crap. Okay, let's go. Yeah, I really like it, huh? It's pretty great. Okay, moving now. If you see anything that is not beautiful, I apologize. Uh, our consider cooking and sewing and crafting, etc., have to be smushed into a very small space. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and rotate the camera and show you. So here is the been used in the middle, but it's widely on hand, and I wanted to get the search from brand. So this actually in here, this is actually a Rami Chima. It's a hanbok skirt, and it also needs a restarching, so it's also soaking. So basically, I've created a solution of potato starch and water, about 2 to 1 actually, and you boil it, not just raw starch, because otherwise the starch will come out of the suspension, right? And then you soak it in the tub and then you hang it here. Here's what we'll be working on today. This is my silk organza veil. And this is I'm going to be turning this into what I'm now calling a kerchief because I have no better word for it. And that seems to be a term that applies to any kind of veil-like head covering in the 15th century, couvre-chef in French. And it's been hanging to just kind of drip dry a little bit. And now we're going to take it back to the ironing board and iron it while it's still damp. And this is going to do a lot of things for me that'll make it a lot easier to work with for one. So the thing about starching is that I learned by reading about dip starching, is that, and I wish I'd known this 30 years ago when I started this historical costuming journey, fabric that is starched is stiffer and easier to sew with. Are easier to sew and easier to cut, right? So by starching this, before I do any of the cutting, I'm going to be able to get much cleaner, straighter lines that, the fabric won't move around, it won't migrate as I'm trying to cut it. And as I sew, it will also be way easier to work with. So yeah, lessons learned, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and take our dip starched or silk organza veil, and we're going to head back to the ironing area now. So some things to remember about fibers, right? Fiber care in general. Silk is an animal protein. And animal proteins are actually weakened by water, whereas plant proteins like linen, rami, hemp, all of the cotton, they're actually strengthened by being immersed in water. So just keep that in mind that your fibers actually get more frayable if it's animal proteins like silk. So I'm going to be a little more gentle in separating this out. And there's a lot of things I've learned about starching fabric, trial by error and all that. For one, if you are making a starch solution and you need more starch in your starch solution that's already in the tub, and you cook it up and then add it, don't add it as one big lump of congealed starch, because then it's going to form weird clumps in the cold water of the tub. So let me see. Yeah. Sorry, trying to figure out the direction of this camera. Okay. So you'll see that little not globule, that's a starch globule from a re-add to make the water starchier. And unfortunately, I didn't take into account that this water in the tub was cold. And so that means that these globules really did not want to dissolve on their own. So I've now got these little starch globules kind of all over the fabric. And I ironed, this is the Moshi Chima, the first big thing. I dip starched and ironed yesterday. And what I learned is it doesn't seem to make a big difference having those globules. I didn't notice any spots that were particularly white in other spots. And also what I have therefore done is tried to go through and actually smooth the globules into the fabric. So don't make my mistake. If you make your starch bath, your starch solution bath, and you want to add more starch to it, you need to not add one big gelatinous clump into the cold tub. It's a bad plan. Don't do that. I'm not certain what other methods I would suggest. I'd have to think about that for a minute, but right now I'm kind of focused on doing this. So I experimented with spray starching one end of this and I really liked the results, but because the spray starch, because it's a homemade solution, it doesn't have any chemicals to sort of make it easier to actually spray. And I ended up with like unevenly distributed starch. So I ended up with some spots that actually were kind of a little bit whiter than other spots. And only I could see it probably because I was looking for it, but I knew, and I know that dip starching creates a much more even, you get absolutely no white splotches. So that's why I decided to take it to the next level and use my too small for humans bathtub as a dip starching station. And this is just a solution of potato starch. Now, a starch that would probably be closer. So they had a starch that seems to be used. cuckoo's something or other. There's a plant I never heard of, and the root of that plant, cuckoo something or other. Sorry, I should have looked it up again this morning. Is apparently very much like arrowroot powder, actually, like the starch in arrowroot. That was heavily used by medieval people for starching. Also, I found a recipe from a medieval dyeing manual that slash laundry manual that talks about it provides a recipe for getting the starch out of wheat bran. I didn't think there was any starch in wheat bran. I thought it was just pure fiber, but I must be wrong. So now I want to experiment with that recipe and actually, you know, cook the starch out of the wheat bran and see how that works. They also apparently medieval people also used rice starch. I know people think rice didn't exist in medieval Europe, but it did. It was grown in Italy. And there are recipes like blancmange, chicken and rice, basically in an almond milk, cooked in almond milk. Very, very common. So they also therefore had rice starch, and rice starch was also used. I did not have any rice starch on hand. I live in Korea, so I probably could have gone and bought some. But I literally had a huge box of potato starch just biding its time in my cabinet. So I decided to go with that for these experiments because, as I said, I just wanted to get moving because I'm kind of feeling this creative momentum and I want to ride it out and not spend that energy sourcing materials if I don't absolutely have to. Yeah. Okay. So just smoothing out the little globules here. And it is, so you'll notice that on my ironing board, yeah, there's, starch is kind of getting into the ironing board. And I don't know, this is a removable cover. I just now started with this whole starching process. I may have to take the cover off and launder the excess starch out of it so that it doesn't like burn, because the starch will burn. And that's something we're going to talk about here. But the advantage of using a modern iron, which is on the ground, versus a medieval iron is that I have much more control over the temperature and it's much easier and safer to use. If any of you have used historical iron, whether Victorian or going back to medieval, it is very hard to control the temperature on those. So yeah. Obviously, I am cheating here. This is not the full medieval experience. Would I like to use a medieval iron? Yes. And actually, now that I think about it, my condottiero is visiting his father in the Seattle area, and I know that they have a very good looking Victorian iron just sitting on the fireplace collecting dust. So I think I'll ask him to bring that back, and at least that is several steps closer to a medieval iron because there weren't. It's going to shock you when I say there weren't massive innovations between the very first sort of 14th, 15th century irons, which were like literally a flat pad of iron with a iron handle coming out of it, like to the I think the Victorian era is when they really started to innovate by adding a little box where you could put coals on the inside instead of having to heat it up over a fire. But the one that I'm talking about is heated over a fire. So much closer to its medieval original. Okay, now, for some reason, once again, there's a lag on the chat's actually showing up. So I apologize if I've missed any comments. Um, but if you're enjoying this, please hit that thumbs up as always. And if you have any questions or comments, do pop them in the chat and they will reach me eventually. I swear it. So yeah, this is looking pretty good. And you don't want it to be sopping wet. And unfortunately, I set up this live stream and then realized I hadn't hung the veil up. So I'm just going to let this part of the veil just kind of drip onto the floor over there. And we're going to go ahead and proceed. So when you are starching a plant fiber, you should use high heat, but this is silk. And silk does not, it will burn. And this is silk organza, which means it's a pretty fine silk. And I can tell there's a significantly higher amount of starch in this. Like I can feel it coating my hands than there was when I spray starched it. So I may find out that this was more starch than I actually wanted for this veil. And you know what's great about starch? It's water soluble. If there's too much starch, you just pop it in a bucket, soak it out, or if you can, wash it out, and then you can start all over again. But historically, they would actually not necessarily launder in between starching. Sometimes they would just restarch. One of the perks of starch, and I'll be interested to test this out, especially because of my active medieval lifestyle. One of the perks of starch is that it actually it prevents staining and it prevents the gunk from clinging to the garment. So especially for white things that are around the face and touch my skin with the oils on my skin, which trap the dirt from the air, etc., that I think will be a pretty big advantage. Oh, wow, I am really liking the way the starched brim frames my face. Oh, wow. Okay, moment of vanity over. So, I am actually going to have to go grab a towel because I can't actually, my hands are so covered in starch now that they're just slippery, slimy. So I'm going to quickly go grab a towel. Be right back. Good thing about a small apartment, everything's close by. Okay, so let's go ahead and get this party started, as it were. So, a couple of things I've learned about, I didn't clean that off, about spray starching is that I'm gonna have to go grab a white cloth. Okay, be right back or grab a wet cloth. Spray starching, the starch will accumulate on your iron, right? And this definitely happened in period. And the way to remove the starch is just to get a wet cloth, preferably of cotton terry cloth, like a wet washcloth, wet a towel, whatever, and then you just take the hot iron and iron it into the wet towel, and the starch will absorb into the terry cloth towel or washcloth instead of being on the iron. So I didn't clean my iron yesterday. Bad Contessa, no biscuit. I'm gonna be right back. And again, it'll take me like 5 seconds. And back. So I'm just going to move this over to here for now. I'm going to put my washcloth there. And I'm going to show you the starch buildup. I'm not certain how visible it is. Um, you can see that white. That's the starch buildup. Okay, so now I'm just going to put it on here and rub. And it will at first try to stick. That's the proteins in the, or not the proteins in the starch. That's the starch actually trying to form bonds. But if you just keep moving it, oh boy, if you just keep, okay, I thought that was a cat. If you just keep moving it, it will eventually, you have to press down to do this. You can't just, you can't just rely on the water and the heat, etc. You really do have to press down. And you can see that's already getting much better. There's a whole bunch though still down here. So the smell is not particularly pleasant, but I've certainly smelt worse, especially these days, any city in America where people are smoking pot everywhere. Okay. It's getting better. This should have been probably a little wetter. A wetter a wetter cloth would be easier than a drier cloth because you want the water to really dissolve. That can't be good. A piece of plastic just came off of somewhere. Oh, whatever. We'll just keep going. Okay. Yeah, so a wetter cloth is better because you need that water to sort of dissolve those bonds that the starch has formed with the hot iron. Okay. And I'm just going to take this towel, give it one more. So one of the sources I found, one of the medieval sources I found describing the starching process actually talks about using a smoother, not an iron. And a smoother, we actually think they may have been made out of glass, maybe out of stone, but we have some extant ones made out of glass. And there's a picture of one from the early 16th century, I think from the Zwölfbrüder Stiftung, the Mendelsche Brüder who lived in the charitable retirement home in Nuremberg. And I think there's actually one depicted in the tailor's shop there, I believe. And it actually talks about using a stone smoother instead of a hot iron to do it. So I haven't I don't I've tried to commission one of these glass smoothers, and it just the commission kind of never worked out. So I guess I should chase that up again, because that seems to be what before the advent of the iron, and the earliest evidence I found of hot irons, is um, early 15th century. So that seems to possibly be the way that people both smoothed fabrics out, and that they did the starching process. So you would let this mostly dry and then finish in the sun, according to the source I found, which makes sense because you want to take advantage of those bleaching effects, right? And then you would use the smoother to smooth it into a beautiful, perfect shape. I would imagine, though, without the heat to create quite the bond, maybe? Not certain if the heat actually plays a role in the bond or if it's just part of the drying process. Right. So, so those little pieces coming off, those are flakes of starch, basically, and they will brush away, as I found out. Okay. This poor iron cover is so soaked in starch. Excuse me, pot smells amazing. Trying to get this comment to show. Okay, weird. Well, I will tell you that pot smells horrible to me and it makes me want to vomit. To me, it just smells like skunk. And I cannot, it gives me a headache and I just cannot be around it. So for those of you who like the smell of pot, good on you. But for the many of us, it's literally a trigger for bad, a very bad feeling. It's one of the reasons I am considering stopping going to events like Penzic because the amount of pot being smoked there is absurd, which would be a shame, but there it is. It is one of my favorite creative Contessa events. It's a great opportunity for all sorts of living history experimentation, but for some reason I can't get that comment to show. In fact, I have a lot of Korean friends, some of you've heard me say this before, who are no longer traveling in cities like New York because the smell is so bad from pot. So, yeah, to me, it's just as bad, if not worse, than cigarette smoke, and I hate the smell of cigarettes. So, you can already see that it is stiffening, right? So, oh, that would have been smart. Should have brought the non-starched veil out because this has a companion veil, and then you could have seen the difference in effect. Now, what's interesting is it is stiffening it, but it is not, despite the amount of starch that I know is in this thing, it is not overly stiff, which is interesting. Well, I guess there's only so much starch that silk organza can hold. You can see that the weave is not particularly tight, and that's kind of what makes silk organza. So, let's see. Now, starching fabric um, it will make it more frayable, because you have this drying thing on the fibers. So, when you fold it, for instance, when you put folds in it, the areas where the folds happen will be weakened over time. So, you want to avoid folding starch things as much as possible. Of course, for those of us who, unlike medieval people who, didn't travel every day or travel to go to medieval events, for instance, because their lives were medieval, whereas we have to travel to go to our medieval events, that's going to be a little more challenging. But that's kind of the trade-off of starch, right? You have the beautiful look, the resistance to staining, also it's antimicrobial, but for that you get, uh, the frayability, the weakening of your fibers. Yeah, yesterday I spent like 2 hours starching, ironing the starch out of this purple chima, rainy chima behind me. Yeah, so here we can see how much starch is on here now. It's pretty intense, so I'm gonna go actually wet this cloth and bring it back because it definitely needs more water if it's going to remove that starch. So I will therefore lift this up and move it down and go get it. Water. Okay, once more the destarching of the iron. The other thing I did, which I didn't do just before, is I just turned the iron off because once the heat is actually causing the starch to continue to bond. So if you turn the heat off and it actually cools a little bit, then that will actually allow the starch to come off. Now, how would a medieval person have handled this? Possibly the same way. They probably knew the same thing. And irons were reheated by putting them over a brazier. There would be a brazier sitting next to the place of ironing, and you basically you'd have coals in it, and you'd put the iron over top of with like three little prongs. You put the iron on the rest above the coals, and you could reheat it that way. So yeah, much more tricky to maintain heat on a medieval iron than on these modern ones. God knows. So this is a pale, 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 pale shadow of the experience a medieval laundress would have had. We actually I've seen expense accounts from the 15th, 14th, and 15th century talking about starching, about paying for either purchasing the starch for clothing or paying to have clothing starched. So, there is a big, big business in that. And the starching, the garments that were being starched were invariably undergarments or kerchiefs, which makes sense if you look at the imagery of women wearing, uh, veils and hats like this. They kind of all fall under the heading of kerchief. And you'll see, they're perfect, they're smooth, not a wrinkle, and they lay in a very specific way. And that's the effect of starching, which is the other reason I wanted to get into dip starching, is because I wanted to take my Burgundian veil game to the next level. Ah, yeah, the tapestry behind me. This is part of La Dame à la Licorne series, which is in the Musée de Cluny in Paris. The Lady and the Unicorn, and the series actually depicts the five senses plus love, desire actually. And it was originally made to fit a specific chamber. And I don't know if they've actually figured out which chamber, and because they found these tapestries were just found in a trunk at the beginning of the 20th century, folded up and forgotten, and I forget which French chateau. So they're not certain in which room they were originally woven, but tapestries used to be woven as a suite of tapestries to cover all the walls in a room. And so they would be woven to fit over things like windows and fireplaces and doors, which is why medieval tapestries sometimes have really weird shapes. because they weren't just meant to cover a plain, uniform, big rectangle of wall. No, no, no. They were meant to fit a specific space. And that's why a suite of tapestries was referred to in the inventories as a chambre, as a chamber, because it was literally a chamber of tapestries. So this is part of a chamber of tapestries. I have all of them. I have I have taste over there, and I have the other ones I think are all in storage. But this one is actually ouïr, is hearing. You can see the organ here, the portative organ that upon which the lady is playing. So that's the sense of hearing. And the other one over there is the sense of taste, I think, or touch. And the other ones that I have are all in storage, unfortunately. But at least I have these. Okay, so we can see the iron is now clean of excess starchy bits, and so I shall turn the heat up again and proceed with our process. Yeah, it's a pretty awesome series. I have a video on reproduction tapestries and where to find them. If you're interested, if you search for tapestry, it should come right up. Because during COVID, I kind of fell into a tapestry, a dead stock or used tapestry buying phase because I was trapped in Albuquerque with no access to medieval European anything. And so, or medieval, you know, there isn't much, sadly, in the way of medieval art and architecture in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Whether in Americas or European or anything. So I needed to have my sense of a medieval space. So I started buying these tapestries to cover my entire house in them during COVID. And that's how I ended up with like 80 something tapestries. I didn't buy them all at once. It was a 2-year process. Most of them are in storage now, however. So as you're doing this, sometimes it's funny. It's not happening with the silk. With the linen, it actually stuck pretty badly. With the linen and the mochi at first. When when iron would make the first contact, it would like almost automatically form those bonds. But then if you just keep moving it, it breaks, and then it smooths out and it's fine. But I don't seem to be having that problem with the silk at all, which is interesting to me. So we've got to be careful that we don't put little distortions and little pleats in them, because this is so fine. It kind of will want to distort on itself as you push against it. So I'm having to be careful about making certain to not put little stretch pleats into. Laurie, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Just experimenting with starching to take my veil game to the next level. So this is going to be my new couvre-chef, my new what I'm calling a winged couvre-chef, because I've got no other term for it than that. They're unfortunately in the sources, there's usually these kind of distinctions aren't made, and I haven't found, even in the expense accounts, they don't necessarily specify the nature of the couvre-chef that is being commissioned, which is kind of frustrating. So I'm just going with couvre-chef and basing it on the portraits. And remember, when you're using art, you must be careful about using art. I'm working on a video essay on this topic for clothing, because artists were creative in the Middle Ages and absolutely invented stuff out of whole cloth. No pun intended. And also, what the picture is depicting will matter for whether it's something a real person wore or it's just something a religious figure from the legendary past was considered to have worn. Right. So make sure that if possible, that you're using portraits of donors or just portraits full out, and not religious, legendary, or mythological characters as the foundation for your historical garments. Now, if you just want to make costumes, no problem. Legendary, historical, religious figures are the place to look at what medieval people thought costumes were. But if you're looking to recreate clothing, different situation. Okay. So actually, what's interesting is that I'm having issues actually getting it. So this is really literally we're participating in an experiment with me. I'm actually having issues getting it to be flat. It's actually wells are actually forming that weren't there before. Like it laid flat before I started starching it and ironing it. So that's interesting. I definitely did not have this problem with the Rami or the linen. For those just joining, I've starched this brim on this kerchief myself on this koi, and I'm really loving the effect that the starch had on it. It looks now exactly like the pictures, which is, of course, a goal for historical costumers that you look like you stepped out of a fresco painting or more morbidly off of an effigy, a tomb effigy. Hashtag goals. Hashtag weird goals. Weird, possibly socially unacceptable goals. I don't know. And it could just be that there's so much starch now in this poor ironing board cover that that is actually what's happening is as I'm lifting it, it's actually sticking and then it's stretching and it's automatically cooling in that stretched position. So that could actually be what's happening, which means I definitely have to take this ironing board cover off and probably soak it to get all of the starch out from yesterday's Moshi Chima starching. And then maybe I will have to wet this and re-iron it. Now the good thing is I won't have to actually restarch it. The starch is there. Probably what I'll probably do to try to get these wells out of it. I don't know if they're showing up. They are. Yeah, these now weirdly soft wrinkles out of it. Probably I'll just have to spray it with water or wet it in some other more authentic manner if I want to go that route. And here we go. And then re-iron it. And hopefully, if I'm doing it on an ironing board that isn't saturated with starch, then it won't stick when I go to pick it up, and then it won't create those stretches. It's a theory. This is what experimental, living history is all about. For me, a kind of this is a very like first level of experimental archaeology, right? Is figuring these things out as part of the joy. So if you guys have any questions along the way, please just drop them in the comments. I'm assuming there probably is, as always, in my mouth. There is, as always, a lag that is happening. So if I don't respond immediately, it's not because I'm ignoring you. It's because the message hasn't reached me in distant Seoul yet. Well, actually, technically, I'm in Daegu, but I put Seoul in because that's more likely to get put in front of more viewers than Daegu is. And as far as I know, most people think that Korea consists entirely of Seoul and that there are no other cities. So, depending on one's perspective, it might not be a lie. So, for those who are joining late, one of the reasons that I'm starching this length of silk is because I'm going to be turning this length of silk into my new winged kerchief, which so I mean on the front it's going to look like this, but made of this transparent organza, and then the back will be the whole veil that will drape over my miter. So you can see this if you start looking at the a lot of the Flemish portraits, the Burgundian portraits. You can even see, Margaret of York wearing them in some of the representations of her. And there's a question in my mind as to whether this part, the facial frame part, is a separate kerchief from the veil part, or if they're together, if they're actually sewn together. So the first one I'm going to make is going to be sewn together. And I know that probably doesn't make sense because it'd be easier to try it first as two separate pieces, but I'm kind of really feeling like it'll be easier to use and to put on if it's one piece instead of two separate pieces. So I'm more willing to go with the lazy wearing route first. And yeah, so we're starching this because starching makes it much easier to cut fabric because it makes it stiffer and then it lays still and it doesn't shift and it doesn't stretch and it doesn't distort under the onslaught of scissors. So I'm hoping that will be true. We'll see. When I did the spray starching, that was before this ironing board was covered, soaked in starch. It made it so nice and smooth, and it was going to be so easy to cut. And now that I'm doing this on this completely soaked ironing board, it's not working out so great. As you can see here, it's perfectly flat, right? But then it's the lifting and distorting that's causing these wells to form. So maybe maybe I can let it just lay there a little bit longer, cool, and then pull it off. And maybe it will separate itself rather than still being hot. We'll try that and see what happens. Right? It's all about the experimentation. So let's see, what have I been looking into since we last met, gentle creators? I've been continuing to read into the Maying rituals that were affected across sort of France and Italy, and England. So lots of fun courtly stuff there that I'll be presenting in my video essay on the Maying in medieval Europe, focusing mostly on 14th and 15th century Maying rituals. Because I don't want the video essay to become I want it to be pretty in depth, and I don't want it to become the history of everything to everyone across all time. Because, of course, so many different cultures have rituals tied to the 1st of May. It just seems to be that time, or even that time of year, if, traditionally their calendar didn't include May. But there's something about that time of year, the return of life, the resurgence of the green, and specifically May 1st, that, the Romans had Floralia. Of course, in Ireland, in ancient Celtic Ireland, it was Beltane. So, or however it was pronounced in Old or Middle Irish. Don't abuse me on that. Irish is not one of my languages. Okay. And it looks like we're going to have to defrag the iron again anyway. Okay, well, don't let the door hit you on the butt on the way out, buddy. No one asked you to be here, so goodness gracious. Literally, I said, okay. So, yeah, seriously. Please do unsubscribe for Centurix. I really don't need you in my community. You are clearly a knave of ill manners and ill repute. Yeah. So yeah, I'm just gonna let this cool a little bit before I pull it off. Still actually wet at this end. No, no, cool first. And we'll see if that results in flatter results. So is anyone else working on anything today? And if you're enjoying this, don't forget to hit that thumbs up. But also note that if you hit the thumbs down, YouTube still loves it and will still promote my content. So the only way you can not support my channel is by not leaving a comment and not hitting any engagement. People don't realize that. So yeah, if you don't like a creator, guys, don't engage at all. Don't hit the thumbs down. Don't leave a comment, because literally all of those things, negative or positive, just promote the channel. So yeah, I know that's the toxic world in which we live right now. So welcome to those just joining. I am actually working on dip starching silk to make a kerchief very much like this, but out of this silk that you see on the ironing board. And it's been soaking in what has now become my starch tub for over 24 hours, and that was probably way too long, probably especially for this organza. I could have dipped it and gone. I've just let it soak because I can only iron so many things at a time, and when you are dip starching, the thing that you iron needs to still be damp, or it will be very hard to fight with. Ooh, Rachel is netting today. This is my first netting project in silk. Oh, nice. How are you finding the silk different than maybe you were using cotton before? Um, Personally, I find finger loop braiding with silk much more challenging, because it slips off your fingers more easily than, say, something like linen or cotton, or wool even. But the result of finger loop braiding with silk is, of course, something just so much more beautiful and shiny, and we humans love shiny things. Okay, so I need to stop applying heat to that so that I can actually let it cool and then lift it off. So I'll just show you for those who haven't seen it yet. This is a sort of 18th century style mochi chima. Chima is a skirt in hanbok, and it's worn at the waist because the 18th century hanbok is waist and before is waist level, not chest level like it came in the end of the 19th century. And I sent it to the cleaners and they sent it back completely unstarched. I'm like, okay, guys, I could have used my delicate cycle to do that. So, but then I thought, I don't want it to be starched with chemicals that are God knows what, and then against my skin being absorbed through my skin. So that's why I decided I was going to delve into the world of dip starching. And then I realized that I also wanted my veils to be starched the way a good lady's veils would have been in the 15th century. So it all worked out. So I'm very, very happy how this worked out. It took about 2 hours to iron because there is, I don't know, 20, 30 yards of Ramy in this. I mean, 30 yards of 15-inch Ramy, but still, they're pretty big skirts and they take a while. So I'm very happy how that turned out. Now it has a nice stiffness to it. And when worn under my over chima, will actually make the skirts puff out beautifully. So goal unlocked. The knots compress so nicely in silk. They just vanish. I'm going to make a finger loop braided braid for this net too. And I haven't tried that in silk yet either. Um, I will say that when I'm not ironing with company, and this as I am in this case, I always put on something on the TV on Netflix or Disney or whatever to watch or listen to a podcast or something because otherwise, yeah, ironing can get a little tedious. That being said, there is a certain zen-like relaxation quality to it. So, it's kind of I guess I can approach it from both perspectives. It being utterly dull or it allowing me a place for my brain to just roam free and think about other things while my hands do something pretty redundant. How do starch garments hold up to humidity? Well, we're going to find out, I hope. Lori asks. Because yeah, I think it should be fine. Because it's been ironed in, so there's a bit of a chemical reaction there. Probably in outright rain, like if it gets soaking wet, then it's going to soften, but the starch won't really run out very much, so it will then dry and re-stiffen. So that'll be an interesting question also when I'm dancing and sweating, and the sweat from my brow ends up interacting with, say, the brim like this. I will report back. This is my first playing with starched anything like this, so we're exploring new territory together. But if you look at those veils, from this era, they are absolutely starch. So, yeah. They are absolutely starched. So this is definitely kind of the more authentic approach to that. Okay, so as we can see, the part of the veil that I ironed flat and then let cool before pulling off definitely doesn't have those wells in it. So yeah, that's the trick. If your fabric is sticking to the board, let it cool before lifting it off so that it doesn't distort as you pull it off of the ironing board. Lesson learned. See, learning with the creative Contessa. Oh, Eric, welcome. Today we are dip starching. I've already dip starched and we are ironing we are ironing my new kerchief, the silk for my new kerchief, so that when I cut out the brim that I'm going to attach to it, frontlet, it will be much easier to cut because the starch will have stiffened the fabric. So this is silk organza actually, and I'm really learning so much in just the 48 minutes that I've been streaming. I've already learned so much about this process because this is a complete experiment for me. I didn't read that much into it because I wanted to explore on my own. So yeah, we've already had some learning curves today about the joys of dip starching. But for those who are just joining, one of the practical benefits to starching, it's not just about the visuals, although there is certainly a visual aspect to it about it looking neat and tidy. An orderly outside is an orderly inside is very much a medieval idea of morality, not just in Europe, by the way, in Asia as well. And so, you know, the starch also is an antimicrobial, so it prevents mildew. It retards mildew growth, for instance. So, that makes sense if you're going to starch, right? Now I'm thinking about this. Wow, that's why they starched bed sheets after laundering them and folded them and put them away because the starch would retard the mildew growth. Like I literally just had that thought now. But also, it makes it easier to cut when you're sewing fabric. So if you starch your fabric before you lay it out and cut it, it makes it so much easier to work with because it's nice and stiff and it doesn't shift and it doesn't move as you cut out your pieces. Unfortunately, the starch does get into the ironing board cover. Um, and that's certainly something in favor of, say, using a smoothing stone instead of a hot iron. But the lesson learned here is that we let it cool before pulling it off. And also to try not to distort the fabric as we're ironing by ideally ironing with the grain and not letting the iron drag it out of the grain. Distort the yeah. Lots of lessons learned, but nothing that cannot be undone. So if your fabric dries before you get around to ironing a spot, you can just spray it to rehydrate it and continue onward. So back to the silk, using silk for finger loop braiding. Yeah, silk for finger loop braiding, a pain in the butt to work with because silk is slippery, but the results are just so much more beautiful. Yeah. I do have a video tutorial on the green dorge, which is a really beautiful 3-color braid. If anyone would like to check that out on the channel. It's great not just for decorative things, but it's small enough. If you use it if you don't double up or quadruple up the loops, it makes something that's small enough for lacing. So you can have pretty lacing for your gown. But also, especially if you double or triple up or double, triple, or quadruple the loops on each finger or use a thicker silk floss, then it does make a really pretty trim for necklines. But it's also very easy to do. And it's only 6 loops. So 6 bows, as they called them. The 15th century word for, they didn't call it finger loop braiding. I forget what they call it, but they referred to each loop as bows. So take 5 bows departed literally means take 5 loops that have been split in half and joined with other colors. That's what departed means. Doesn't mean that they've left the building or anything like that. So you can see that as I'm ironing, there's like little flakes of starch coming off, and that's fine. It doesn't hurt the fabric. You can just brush it off. That's the consequence of my iron sort of descaling. Sorry, there we go. Descaling, you can see all that white starch buildup. And what I will do eventually, which I did at the beginning, is we'll go wet this cloth with some more water, turn off the heat of the iron, and then basically descale it onto the cloth, which will loosen up all of those starch bits. I might do that now because I'm getting kind of annoyed by the amount of starch that's flaking off. Yeah. Is the green dorge the pattern with the alternating chevrons down the center? I'm awful at remembering their names. It's yes. Basically, it's got a color border on the edges, and then the 2 alternating colors going down the center. That is correct. That is the green dorge. Now, why it's called the green dorge, I've never looked that up. And as a linguist, that I thought now fascinates me because actually it doesn't necessarily have green in it. It's not inherently part of its features. So interesting. I'll have to look that up. If anyone has any ideas on why the green dorge finger loop braid is called the green dorge, do pop them in the comments. That's the kind of trivia I love. One of the reasons I would probably be a decent contender on a show like Jeopardy, although not great, because my knowledge of sports and entertainment is pretty modern. Entertainment is pretty bad. Pop culture, I'm not your girl. But as long as, the categories are in my favor, I could probably rock on Jeopardy because of all the random knowledge that I do have on a wide array of topics, just not on sports and modern professional athletics at any rate, or modern pop culture. Oh yeah, all these flakes. So I'm very excited of how this project will turn out for my not a hennin, my miter. While I let that cool, I'm going to show you what happened to my not a miter in the last trip, or not a hennin. Okay, you'll notice how very sadly deformed it now is, and that's because I packed it very stupidly. I took my collar box, my big wooden leather covered box in which my Maria Portinari collar sits and all my other medieval jewelry is in there. And I packed this at the bottom of the suitcase and then put the collar box above it so that when I put the suitcase upright to drag it, the collar blocks literally slid into it and smushed it flat like this. Now, this is parchment vellum, like goatskin vellum, actually. So I might be able to dampen it and reshape it, like steam it or spray it, dampen it in some way and reshape it. It could work. But this could also just be the incentive I've been needing to make a new one using my now understanding of how to make these things. So either way, it's still kind of sad. But the idea is that this kerchief is going to be worn on top of this. So the you'll actually have the frame, this part will be on top and will come forward around the face. And then over top of that will go the black silk velvet hood. So you have this multi-layer framing effect, which I just personally love. Poor not a hennin. Okay. So let me go and wet this cloth so that we can descale it. So next time I do something like this, I'll know how to have, this is the first time doing this ironing thing together. So I'll know how to have everything set up. I'll have a bowl of water and I'll try to remember to bring more things around me. But yeah, learning curve and all that. Okay. So yeah, there's way more, almost no wells are created if you pull it up once it's cooled. Okay, good things to know. So iron there. And again, I turn it off so that the heat stops coming, and this will allow the starch to eventually come off against the wet, rough terry cloth thing. Okay, question. On the subject of packing, I know you travel quite a lot. Yeah, sometimes too much, I think. And I assume it must be with an incredible amount of stuff. Yes, you are correct. Usually two 32-kilogram bags, and plus a carry-on, plus a backpack, plus a satchel. I imagine having to fly must make it a logistical nightmare. So I've actually been doing medieval living history by plane for 22 years now. So I'm quite good at it. And it's just a natural thing. So there's a couple of tricks. One is try to fly in a class of service where you get two checked bags at 32 kilograms each. If you don't, then you sometimes have to make some hard choices about what you bring. But one of the tricks, especially if you're flying on airlines that don't weigh your carry-on, is put dense, heavy things in your carry-on. So, for example, if you are a man or woman in arms and you have harness or some other form of armor with you, then you put your helmet in your carry-on, right? The dense, heavy thing goes in your carry-on, not in your checked bags. Wow, it just really does not want to come off. Yeah, look at that. It is really just being super stubborn. Steam got a little too hot. Oh, well, that's because I'm stupid, and instead of turning it on, I turned it all the way up. Go me. Sorry about that. Yeah, so yeah, packing medievally for medieval living history doesn't have to be a logistical nightmare. It can actually be pretty simple. I have a packing list, and it's basically the same packing list for almost any event. At least the essentials are. And yeah, you learn. I've learned exactly how to pack things in my suitcase so that things are protected, which is why I was particularly. You can tell I was not having a particularly good time at the end of my trip to the U.S. because my best friend's mother, who was like a second mother to me, was dying, and I was visiting her for the last time. And so when I packed, I wasn't really thinking as clearly as I might have been, and so I packed things in the wrong order. But if I packed them in the right order, my not a hennin has literally been in existence for that one for 18 years and has more frequent flyer miles under its belt than most Americans do. So, or hell, most people in the world do probably, honestly, not just Americans. And it has survived. So it's only this last trip where I mispacked it that it died a horrible, horrible death. Okay, yeah. Would explain why it just kept getting hotter and hotter. Oh well, I was busy thinking about packing. Do anyone else on this chat have to do their medieval living history or their living history activities via airplane? Am I the only one? I mean, even once I get to the U.S., I still have to fly to hell and gone all over the place. This last trip to go to attend two medieval living history events, I flew from Seoul to Zurich, Zurich to Washington, drove from Washington to Delaware, went from Delaware to BWI, Baltimore, Washington International, flew to Oklahoma, drove to the event site, flew from Oklahoma to Philadelphia, Philadelphia back to Delaware for a family visit, Delaware back to Philadelphia to fly down to Mobile, to drive up to Selma, to drive to Montgomery, to catch a plane via Atlanta to St. Louis. From St. Louis, I took the train up to Chicago O'Hare and then flew back to Seoul and then took a bus back to Daegu. So that was all in 3 weeks that I just described. That was 3 weeks worth of travel. Yeah, so probably more than your average bear, but that's kind of a typical whirlwind medieval living history gig tour for me. Generally, when I go one place, I try to get to as many things in as I can when I'm going to cross an ocean or a continent like that. So yeah, that is just generally how I roll. I kind of fantasize sometimes about traveling to a place, staying in one place, unpacking there, and then traveling back home. Like I don't, I haven't done that in so long. I don't remember what it's like. Because as long as I can remember, family trips always involve visiting parents who were divorced and living in completely separate states. So even when I would go living in Germany and go back to visit family, I still had to, go to different places to get all that parental visiting in. So yeah, I kind of fantasize about that. Seems like a nice, relaxing way to travel. I don't understand how people can relax when they travel. Completely first world problems, though. That's not gonna happen. So I'm not complaining. I'm just observing. Okay, so I'm getting the fibers that really started to stick inside this iron off. Okay, back to the ironing board. Right. So yeah, very clearly I'm going to be re-ironing like the parts that have the wells in them. But otherwise I can definitely see, I can already feel, I don't know if the stiffness is really coming across. It's maybe if I do it this way, you can kind of see how the body it kind of has now as a result of being starched. I can tell that it will be easier to cut for certain. So at least that part is true. To get the nice, perfectly flat look, I'm just going to have to re-iron some of those spots, and maybe also by washing this ironing board cover, I will be able to get rid of that excess starch. So is anyone else working on anything today, this evening, middle of the night, wherever you are in the world? Is there anyone else in the Eastern Hemisphere with me in kind of the Seoul, Tokyo, Sydney, Melbourne, Thailand, Vietnam, those strips of, or even China, Hong Kong, maybe? I'm always interested to see how far my reach goes. Ugh, there was a globule. So yeah, apparently I missed a globule, and thankfully the globules seem to just flake right off if you scratch at them, which may or may not be great for the fabric. So for those who missed the beginning, I mentioned that because of a mistake I made in trying to add more starch to the dipping bath, and the way I did it, we ended up with this massive clump of just gelatinous starch mixture that did not dissolve into the cold water of the bathtub, which meant that there were little globules of starch kind of floating around, and they have definitely come out in the when I took them out, they were kind of still there. And I tried to smooth as many of them in as possible and distribute them. Lots of lessons learned in this process. And it should, if I'd really thought about it, it would have made sense. Don't add cold starch gel or starch gel to a bathtub full of cold water, right? The water needs to be at least warm to help it dissolve into it. But yeah, I didn't, as I say, I didn't intellectualize the process properly. That's on me. So yeah, I'm definitely excited to take my veil game to the next level. I'm also with this organza. I plan on making a yeah, the word in French just went away. Colletto, we say in Italian, a partlet. Um, and the sort of translucent nod at modesty that women in France and Italy and England are wearing at this point over their very low-necked garments. Um, I look at it as another layer of potential sunblock for me, but also kind of being flirty and stylish. So I plan on making one of those out of this same silk organza. I made one, the only one I've ever made, I've stupidly made out of a Habatai silk, and the bias effects there were horrible and annoying, and it made it impossible to wear, and it had weird frilling at the edges because, it was cut across the bias because of the angles. Anyway, I think using a stiffer silk like this organza will be much more successful. Probably the ones we see in a lot of the portraits are not silk at all, but are probably a very, very magically fine linen for which Flanders was so very famous, but that I have never been able to find anywhere in the world, in the modern world. And I mean the stuff that is like so translucent that it became one of the masterful tricks of the Flemish painters to actually be able to depict it. Yeah, that level of transparency in linen I have never found. It's because it's thinner. It's like this, but linen and actually more translucent. Yeah, so I think if there's anyone weaving such a thing, it would be incredibly expensive because the craftsmanship that would be required to create it would be pretty intense. Oh, thank you, generic YouTube user. Wrong century, but I'm repurposing my old canvas battle harness for bushcraft and bought a hairdryer today for melting wax into the bags to make them watertight again. Oh, nice. I mean, you could use hairdryer, but what about Thomas? What about dipping for the wax, or do you not want to have just a permanent pot of wax ready for dipping things at all times? In case I don't blame you. You can also, I also have use the oven to re-wax things. So if you shave your beeswax and spread it around the thing that you want re-waxed and put it in the oven at low heat, like 100 degrees centigrade, um, then that works pretty well too. If you don't want to use the hair dryer. At Penzic, there's a forge, a smith, a blacksmith who actually they sell wax linen wraps. And so they actually have because they do a lot of waxing on their leather things. So they have a slow cooker filled with beeswax. So if you ever want to get Penzic, if you need to get something rewaxed, you can go and pay them to rewax your things for you there in the bubbling cauldron of permanent beeswax, permanently melted beeswax. Yeah, I've made a lot of my own wax linen wraps. I actually teach workshops on it sometimes. because a while ago I decided to dispose of the as many petrochemicals in my life as possible, which isn't that easy, by the way. And one of the big steps to that was having not plastic food storage, and so I replaced, plastic wrap with wax linen. And I mentioned them actually in one of my series on must-haves for the modern medievalist, things that you can use in both your medieval and modern life. I do mention the wax wraps. And wax wraps have a really interesting history. Oh, thank you, Dodie, for joining and for supporting my channel. I really appreciate it. We also have Laurie is still in the chat. She's one of my patrons, so I really appreciate you guys who are supporting me in that way. That's really generous of you, and I'm really honored to have that kind of support. So wax linen wraps have an interesting use in medieval Europe. It's actually hard to prove their use for food storage, although there is one entry, one piece of tantalizing evidence I found in the Ménagier de Paris. He tells his wife, his young wife, whom he's instructing to become the perfect wife. He tells her that she should wrap things like rosemary and wax linen to preserve it. So that's evidence that at least one person had the idea to use wax linen for food storage. But otherwise, do any of you know the really interesting yet morbid use of wax linen in the Middle Ages? I'll spoil the answer because I don't want to wait for it. um, they wrapped bodies in, especially royalty, people of note and importance. They wrapped their bodies in waxed linen as part of the embalming process. So they would act like in an entire massive sheet of wax linen. So not like bandages, not like mummies, but like basically a big wax linen shroud. And a lot of the kings, medieval kings, when they open their tombs, they're still wrapped in their wax, and it really is preservative. There was in the 18th century, they had this morbid fascination with opening tombs. And so they wrote reports when they would open these royal tombs, and they would actually take sketches. They would draw the corpse, and they were still wet corpses, basically. They still had skin, they still had soft tissue. Of course, opening up that wax wrap probably accelerated the decomposition process. But yeah, the wraps were not just infused with beeswax, which is also very antimicrobial. They were infused with bitumen and other things that have been used historically in mummification that would be natural preservatives. So yeah, how's that for a fun note for the day? Wax wrapping dead bodies in wax linen to preserve them for posterity. Comment, not related, but you mentioned sunblock. What would be the options for sun protection for a Florentine lady? I feel like the veil just won't cut it. No. So, okay, let's talk about sun protection in the Middle Ages. The Trotula, a actually 12th century guide to women's health and basically women's gynecology, but also has a whole tome on skin creams and ablutions and also medicinal stuff, talks about that the Salernitan ladies, the ladies from Salerno, would actually, they had a mineral blocker. Now their mineral blocker was made with white lead, but it was lead and oil or fat, maybe lard, I think, mixed together. And then according to the trotula, it's smeared on their skin and it protects them, keeps their skin nice and white. Like, well, yeah, white lead is definitely going to do that. But of course, therefore, the modern equivalent is a mineral blocker like zinc or titanium dioxide. Zinc oxide is the better choice, by the way, for that. So the Italian women absolutely had sun creams, 100%, and they used them. But I don't recommend using a medieval replica unless you really want to explore what lead poisoning is like over the long term. So sunblock, absolutely medieval. Just swap out that white lead for the completely inert zinc oxide, and you're good to go. But in many cases, one thing I've noticed is that often as modern medieval living history practitioners, we come up with solutions for problems that medieval people didn't have. What I mean by that is that we're doing things they didn't do, and therefore they didn't need a solution for. So for instance, one of the most common questions I get from people is, well, they only wore wool and they didn't have linen overgarments. How did they stay cool in the hot afternoon? And I'm like, if you live in a place where it's perennially hot in the heat of the day, you take a siesta. You don't go and have a fully harnessed deed of arms in the hottest time of day in medieval Italy or Spain or Greece or any place in Europe where it gets hot in the middle of the day, because medieval Europe before the Little Ice Age was actually a pretty warm place. So, I have to remind people that often we're coming up with solutions for problems they didn't have. They didn't go out in the heat of the sun at the hottest time of day. So, therefore, you don't need to worry about it being so hot. Or often, balls and even deeds of arms, especially in hot places like Italy, were hosted in the piazza, in the town square. And if any of you have been to any medieval Italian city, you're going to notice that the sun doesn't often hit much of a piazza, a medieval piazza anyway, because the buildings surrounding them are really tall. And in the Middle Ages, they were even taller because Italy had medieval tower houses, these massive skyscrapers, right? Literally 12, 13 stories tall. Bologna still has some of them. You can see them in Germaniano, right? So that would basically mean that the streets of the cities were mostly in shadow for most of the day, which means they were very cool, which means they didn't really need to have evaporative cooling, because even though the temperature maybe out in the fields was 30 degrees centigrade, 95 degrees Fahrenheit, it didn't matter, because in the cool of the cities where the nobility and the elites lived, their palazzi were cooled by all sorts of natural methods, by the architecture, by the way the courtyards were enclosed and protected from the sunlight. The city squares were protected in that way. So we're often just trying to come up with solutions for problems that didn't exist. Which makes me wonder, maybe we need to reconsider how we do medieval living history in hot places. Maybe we don't have a deed of arms at noon. Maybe the deed of arms is at 5 p.m. Maybe we don't do a ball. You know, okay, well, balls generally are in the evening, so that's probably not going to. Most people won't actually do a ball at the time that people in cooler places would do them. So in Germany, for instance, we know that their balls were usually afternoon balls. Like in Ulm, we know that the custom of the city of Ulm in the 15th century was to have an afternoon ball, and that completely makes sense, right? You're going to take advantage of the natural light from the sunlight, but it's also not going to be too hot, and you're going to be in any case inside a medieval the great hall, like the city hall, where the ceilings would be super tall and it would be really well insulated against the effects of sun and heat anyway, right? So often we're just trying to do things in not the right spaces at not the right times of day, instead of doing them the way medieval people would have done them, when and where they would have done them. Rant off. I indeed heard something, Eric says, of putting lard on one's face by the Lady Bernadette Banner. Yeah, so she's yeah, obviously for her, she's talking about Victorian or Edwardian. But I would be shocked if I looked at Edwardian or Victorian manuals of, ladies concoctions and didn't find something equivalent with lead and lard, probably, to keep the skin nice and protected against the sun. Because it's really, we don't get chemical blockers, the synthetic chemical blockers, until the 20th century, right? Yeah, doesn't this kerchief look great after the starch? It really does. I'm really loving it. Did they have garments to create shade? This past summer, I enjoyed using a straw hat, but was dressed as a French peasant. Events are definitely not planned with sun exposure in mind. Yeah, for certain not. Yeah, so peasants wore straw hats, right? Because again, we're trying to come up with solutions for situations that didn't exist. Ladies just don't seem right. So we have depictions of ladies like in the Maying. If you look at May Day, depictions of courtly May Day activities, they are out there on horseback. But if you really look closely at the kind of spaces they're in, they're kind of in the woods, right? Where they would be protected by the sun from the natural shade of the trees. I think they probably would have actually covered themselves. I think they would have used, for shade. It would have been more local, right? They would have worn something not so transparent to cover their décolletage, right? They would have just avoided being in direct sunlight. We don't see parasols. Don't even The earliest parasol I've seen is like late 16th century in Europe. In Europe, mind you, in Asia, obviously, much more. So, it's again, it's like we're not we're we're doing things the way medieval people wouldn't have. And so what I do for myself, I actually go the mysterious route. So I take my veil, this veil actually that's draped from my mitre, or even if I'm doing the Italian thing, then I've got all that veiling down my back. I just take the tails from my veil and just literally drape them over my face so that I'm entirely covered. And that creates the kind of shade I need to protect myself from the sun. It makes me look really mysterious. If you look in some of my videos, you'll see footage from me at Penzic marching across the field with my veil across my face, and that's not an accident of the wind. That's on purpose. So I've taken to calling those my sun veils, and they seem to work pretty well for, as you say, that situation in which you need shade because we're out there on a burning battlefield or just a burning sunburnt field, and that's just the way it is. Um, and I do have a parasol that has a wooden frame and canvas. It's just plain natural canvas. I use it at Penzig, and I absolutely unabashedly will use that to provide myself with extra protection because my skin is much more important to me than authenticity. Yeah. So that is my nod to modernity, is to have a wooden it's very heavy, by the way, a parasol with a very heavy wooden frame and a heavy cotton canvas over top of it. Yeah. So that's those. Sometimes you just have to make a compromise. You have to decide what's more important: the perfect, authentic look all the time, or maybe those moments when you're out in the sun that you just yield to sanity and protect yourself in whatever way you can. Yeah. Yeah. Events are definitely not planned with some exposure in mind, for certain. Uh, Let's pull this up. Wasn't cool enough. It's okay. I think I've learned a lot today, so I'll definitely be re-ironing this. I'll get the, because you can also see, unfortunately, because of the starch, that the globules that were there, you can kind of see. Can you see? Can you see the striations, the variations in whiteness? So those are spots where there were globules that I didn't quite get out, where the starch is definitely thicker than in other places. So I'm probably going to be redipping this anyway, just to get out some of, to even that out and redoing it. But this has been a very valuable experience from the learning perspective in any case. And getting to chat with you all and, explore some things and get creative it's never a bad thing. Even though apparently some people think this is boring. Oh well, you don't have to watch. But for those who are, please hit that thumbs up. And if anyone has any questions about medieval living history, medieval clothing, dance, any kind of practical aspects, do pop them in the chat. I am here for you. So my sleep schedule has been completely disrupted by the jet lag coming back from my recent spate of medievalist travel. But I am hoping to finish up. I've finished the script. I just have to video it for medieval men's Irish clothing in the Pale, in the areas of English control in the 15th century. I've got a lot of interesting things there. Some of you heard me say that, but I thought it would bear repeating. So I'm excited to get that out before the end of the month. It's probably going to be a two-parter because there's a lot. And I also tried to provide a practical aspect, not just necessarily here's what we know from the sources. Try to provide people with, well, this is what the layers would have been. Here's how they would have gone together. Unfortunately, I don't have any English style garments from that era, which is kind of what they would have been within the Pale in terms of cut. But I think I'm still going to use at least my condottiero to demonstrate the layers, with the caveat that the particular shapes here are Italian, but that the layers and the way they go together, it's still the same. I think that's better than just always, some people work well with original medieval visuals, like they're fine with looking at medieval art and figuring out what's going on. But some people need the reconstruction of the garment in a completely, without any of the medieval stylized distortions, for them to really visualize it. So I'm going to try to provide both in this video. Yeah, I actually, seeing Laurie say she agrees with my rant about reasonable compromises. there are some really hardcore practitioners of living history who, for example, think that if you have to wear glasses, you shouldn't be out there because if you're wearing, especially if you're from the pre-spectacle era, then you shouldn't be out there because your glasses didn't exist and you're completely ruining the entire event by being a person, a say 9th century person in glasses. And I'm like, I no, just no. Absolutely not. If you don't have the imagination to just visually wash away something as essential to a person's daily experience as having visual corrective aids like glasses, then maybe you should be doing something not creative like living history. Rachel says, I love getting the medieval source and modern recreation side by side. Yeah, I really like to be able to provide that when I can because it also helps people show the way that an original medieval piece of art can be interpreted into real world clothing, right? Um, Susan says the turret Coover chef is ironing beautifully. Where do you get potato starch? Grocery stores sell potato starch, especially if there's a section for halal, not halal. I'm sorry, kosher. I apologize, deeply imperfect. I don't confuse those terms normally. I was thinking about lamb earlier, and we have halal lamb in our freezer anyway. Um, Kosher. If your grocery store has a kosher section, they absolutely sell potato starch there, especially during Passover, because you can make bread and cakes out of potato starch, and then that doesn't violate the Passover strictures, right? So you can, if it's not sold anywhere else in your grocery store and they have a kosher section, there will be potato starch there. If you have a Bob Red Mill section, they sell potato starch. Bob's Red Mill sells potato starch, and the section will probably have potato starch. Otherwise, you can get it online. Vitacost.com is my go-to for online groceries. Don't patronize Amazon, please. They are evil, and Jeff Bezos needs to stop living off of our lifeblood until Amazon becomes a responsible employer paying taxes and treating its employees well. Don't support Amazon. Rant off. Let me see. Yeah, I think a lot of people forget that this is a hobby and it's supposed to be fun. Yes, I agree with that. And that, I get that, you can choose the level of authenticity for your group, but really for something as essential as glasses, I mean, it's not like saying, well, I don't want you to wear, if this is a 12th century group, you can't wear 13th century. Okay, it's a 12th century group, their rules. But to tell someone, well, you're legally blind and can't wear contacts, you can't participate in our group though, because we don't want your Coke bottle glasses harshing our vibe. I'm just like, that level of insensitivity that's not my kind of medievalism. I'm sorry. I have enough imagination that I can logic away that and still be in my 15th century mindset, right? There's a lot of ways I, as a 15th century person, could view something that someone is wearing that isn't perfectly authentic. And I'd still be in my, medieval fantasy world. That's just me. Being elitist about authenticity is also a great way to keep people out of the hobby when all the clubs I know are already struggling with recruitment. Well, so if you want to see a video that lost me a bunch of my elitist living history followers, go and check out my Medieval on the Cheap series. I think the compilation is called Medieval Shopping, something or like that. Right. But I released it as a series originally, and that lost me subscribers from the elitist living historians because they said I was teaching people to do it wrong by providing them with medievaloid examples that they could afford by thrifting and whatnot. I was telling them that was okay and it's not okay. And if they are too poor, it was like a Scrooge moment, right? If they are too poor to do it right, then they should just sit in their backyards and grill instead, because backyards are cheap and grilling is cheap and meat is cheap to grill, apparently. Poor people can do that, apparently. Yeah, I know some of you have heard this anecdote before, but it bears repeating. So yeah, that's not my medieval living history world. And those groups, I'm going to bet, probably are, I'm going to say, not young in their average age, and are probably, yeah, not exactly growing. But literally, those people also said, we're not interested in growing our group. We have our people and that's all we need. And, their club is like 10 or 15 people and they're fine with that. Okay. your club, your rules, but I don't agree with that ethos. So, let me see. Yeah, I prefer helping people improve their game over playing in classes groups. Yeah, same here. Even the immersive event I run called Decameron, by the way, I found a really great site for it in the Pacific Northwest. So I might be starting a Pacific Northwest Decameron for those in that part of the world. Anyway, my immersive event, the Decameron, um, people hear immersive and they think that it's about the authenticity of kit. And I'm like, no, the immersive component is how we interact with each other. It's the things we do. It's how we say things. It's how we treat each other. That's the immersive aspect. To attend the event, I just want an attempt at 14th or 15th century clothing. That's and basically new people came. They saw what the rest of us experienced people were wearing, and by their next Decameron, they had upped their game 1,000% without us having to be judgy or prescriptive in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, I even at immersive events, I prefer that aspect because I can always imagine away a garment that isn't exactly perfect or not even close to perfect. But I cannot imagine a way people interacting in a modern manner. Like otherwise, they're just modern people wearing costumes instead of medieval people wearing costumes. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, just gonna let this cool before pulling it up. Try to smooth this out, flatten this a little bit more. Yeah, so Susan, what you missed earlier, maybe, although no, you were here from the beginning, so no. But so what some people may have missed is that if you pull, because there's so much starch in the ironing board cover, that the veil is basically gluing itself, the silk is gluing itself to the ironing board, not permanently. It will detach. But if I pull it to detach it while it is still warm, it actually distorts and creates wells where it pulls unevenly as I remove it. So I'm waiting for it to cool before I remove it, so that hopefully the parts that I've ironed will indeed stay flat instead of welling. You can see kind of wells here. It's not necessarily easy to pick up by the thing, but it's not the parts where it's not laying flat, where it now actually has weird texture. Yeah, that's because it was still hot when I pulled it up, and so it was still very malleable, as it were. Unfortunately, people keep trying to call me now that I'm in the middle of a live stream. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull this up and see what happens. Yeah, see, because it was cool, it's pretty flat. Okay, last little section, and then I'm going to call that good for the day. So does anyone have any plans for projects that you have yet to undertake? I have a lot of plans and I keep seeing things I want to make. Unfortunately, I have this weird uh, daily body energy rhythm where I have creative energy really only daylight hours. And then once it's dark, I get real sleepy. So I have a very limited time to accomplish things. And unfortunately, in that accomplishing, that includes cooking. And I cook for myself because well, one, a lot of things I like to eat you can't just buy easily here at a in Korea at restaurants. But two, I also like to control what goes into my body. So I like to know that the oils are not industrial oils, that, the ingredients are quality, farmed sustainably, that kind of thing. And you can't guarantee that when you go to a restaurant. So I don't eat out very much, which means I have to cook a lot, which takes time and takes creative energy. So I don't have as much time to create the things I would like to create. And then, of course, with all the video editing and all the different channels I have. Anyway, I would actually like to start exploring some medieval Korean fashion, making it. I've been studying it and I'm ready to start making it. I'd like to actually start back in the Shilla dynasty. And because I really love going to Gyeongju, and Gyeongju is a Shilla city, and then kind of move my way forward, skipping over the later Korea when things were basically just baggy, drapey, blah, and then going basically to 16th century Joseon, where they have some really nicely, elegantly draped garments. Let me see. For new plans, I am maybe planning to start. Maybe planning. Yeah, I know that feeling. Maybe planning to start a new Codex Umbroum. I am actually not familiar with that codex. What specific kind of garment or piece of equipment is that? It's unusual for me not to recognize a source like that. I'm assuming maybe it's a kind of shield, maybe, or is it a garment that's depicted in the codex? Oh, there's enough. I could probably scrape these flakes of starch off and use them to bake. As part of the process of looking into dip starching, I actually did learn how to extract starch yourself, like how to actually make starch, which was an interesting thing from potatoes and from other sources. So that was also interesting. I might, if I can find, I do want to experiment with the bran, see about getting the starch out of that as per the medieval um, prescription. And if I can find that cuckoo root, whatever cuckoo something plant root, then I will definitely want to play with that. It's a big if. Let me see. It's a book one scribes their knowledge usually. Oh, I've never heard of that. Okay. Interesting. So do you want to actually bind the book yourself and then scribe into it? Or are you talking about taking an already made book and then scribing your book of secrets? So in English we call that a book of secrets. Oh, umbraum. Yeah. In English we call those a book of secrets. Libro, or in Italian, libro dei segreti. I think at least is what you're talking about. Ladies kept them, and the knowledge wasn't all esoteric. For ladies, it was often very practical, actually. It was their personal recipes for healing ointments and cosmetics and other medicines. It was their like finger loop braiding. That's one of the sets of finger loop braiding instructions we have is from Catherine Tolemache's Book of Secrets. Um, it contained, in the case of Caterina Sforza, her experiments, her very in-depth, very scientific experiments in chemical experiments mostly. So yeah, interesting. Yeah, alchemy also goes into them. Yeah, Book of Secrets was a really interesting, fascinating source of information. They really are because each person's Book of Secrets was different. So, different kinds of information from different perspectives. Yeah, Codex Umbraum. Yeah, of course. Of course, that makes sense. Book of Shadows. Right. Can't believe I've never heard that term before. Well, this goes to show there's always things to learn, which is why I don't understand how immortals could possibly ever get bored. Okay, well, everyone, let me just we're going to give this a final cool, and then I'll show you the final effect. And yeah, unfortunately, some of those globules I mentioned that were the result of not properly dissolving the addition to the starch bath, they're very visible. So for certain, this is going to be going back in a bucket of water, so I can redistribute the starch globules. Um, but for now, it was a learning process, and it was good to do it with you all. Okay, so here is finished length of fabric, right? And so this end is shiny and wet, and you may be wondering how I affected that magic. Well, the kitty's water fountain is right beneath the ironing board here, and so apparently this ended up in the kitty's water fountain, which I think I need to change, so it's probably not the cleanest water at the moment because Chimi likes to wash his paws in it. Well, anyway, Um, yeah, so let me just drape this over my head and then you can kind of see again, if I thought about it, I would have brought the unstarched veil out so you could see the difference. But you can really already see how look at the kind of stiffness that creates, right? Just like that, and you can already see the effect that uh, this is actually replicating the effect that one sees in the veiling of women in the 15th century and even going in definitely into the 16th century when starching really takes off in a very real way, right? Uh, someone that binds books. Ah, nice. I think I will contact them. Now that thou speakest of it, I know someone that binds books. I think I will contact them. I think that's a brilliant idea. Although, if you go to Penzic, people, there is a book binding workshop. You can go and actually not just learn, but bind your own book right there. It's a pretty great class. Highly recommend it. Okay, so what do we think of the starching effect, everyone? I can definitely tell that this is going to lend a. Okay, I'm gonna throw on the poor abused miter to at least give you an idea. Poor thing. Of how this will look. Okay. Oh, this poor thing. Oh my God. Okay. Okay. Where are my ladies in waiting when I need them? Okay. So that you at least get an idea of how the starched veil will drape on the back of the miter, right? I mean, look at that. That's a pretty great look. Wow. Look at how perfectly smooth that is. Yeah, it looks pretty great, huh? Even with my horribly malformed miter, this poor thing. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, baby. I'll see if I can fix you. Maybe I'll do a live stream on trying to fix this, but not today. I'll have to think about that a little bit and what it's going to take. Probably something formed vaguely like a cone and probably some water spray. I'll just maybe spray it, or I might soak it. I'll have to think about that. It is actual vellum, so it can be reformed. Oh, thank you, Laurie. 10 out of 10. Not bad for my first starched veil. I have to say, I'm pretty happy with it. Excited to be able to take it to the next level. If my condottiere is watching, I want the non-rusty Victorian iron in your dad's living room. Please bring it back with you. Okay, well, everyone, thank you for joining me today. Before we say goodbye, I'll give you a chance for any questions you may have about what we just did here. I'll be doing for certain a planned live stream, the usual time this Saturday morning, Seoul time, Friday evening, East Coast, middle of the night, Europe. I'm sorry, Europe. I'm sorry. That's such a terrible time. I'm going to actually try to start doing a live stream that works better in a time slot that works better for Europeans, but it might have to wait until my sleep schedule fixes itself. Right now, I'm sleeping at really odd hours. I'm worried about the cat water stain. Yeah. The good thing about silk, it is very washable and stains generally come right out. I will say, looking at the cat water, it's clear, so that's okay. There just might be some fur on it. Chimi likes to wash his paws. If you go to the Kitties of the Kitties of the Palace channel, there's a video very recently of Chimi washing his paws in our water fountain. So I think it's the one that says "Cats be weird," something like that was the way I phrased that. Yeah. Okay. Otherwise, everyone, I really appreciate you joining me, and I stay tuned. Just keep your eye on this channel because I probably will be doing some more spontaneous as I like get inspired to do things like this. Literally, I woke up and said I'm doing this now. So keep your eye on the notifications. Actually, make sure notifications are turned on, and if you want to know whenever I launch things, make sure that all notifications are turned on because otherwise YouTube tries to make the call for you of what might keep you engaged rather than just letting you know when I do things. Yeah, so I'm definitely planning some more spontaneous things, but on the weekend we'll be doing our usual medieval sew along. I will probably be working on repairs, or I might actually be finally sewing this new kerchief now that we've done the starching, and actually get it done and put it together. Yeah. Okay, everyone. With that, I'm going to go do other things with my day. There's like 1,000 things I need to do today, among them video editing. So I appreciate you all joining in today. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up. And once the video posts, if you can just leave a little emoji or a little comment under the posted published video, that really helps with the Algorithm, welcome to the ecosystem in which I must operate. Okay, everyone. Thank you. Stay creative, everyone. Until next time. Bye. Just going to go ahead. Iron the kitty water. You don't want maybe don't iron the kitty water on. Yeah.